Hello, and welcome to the From Past Prejudice to Present Policy, the Impact of Land Ownership Exclusion Laws on Diverse Communities webinar, co-hosted by Committee of 100 and APA Justice. I'm Cindy Tsai, Interim President at Committee of 100. I'm honored to be here to moderate this discussion on the troubling resurgence of alien land laws, introduce our distinguished panelists, and outline today's webinar schedule. For those of you who are attending a Committee of 100 event for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who have attended our events previously, welcome back. Committee of 100 is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded 35 years ago. Our dual mission is to advance the inclusion of Chinese Americans in the United States and to foster constructive relations between the United States and Greater China. Recent federal and state efforts to restrict property ownership by foreign citizens, often referred to as alien land laws, have caused concern in the Asian American community. To address this, Committee of 100 created a database and an interactive map to help people and organizations stay informed about these laws, which can be found on our website. We will also put the link in the chat box. Historically, alien land laws came out of the rise of xenophobia and racism in the early 20th century, targeting Asian immigrants by restricting their rights to own land and to farm. Today, we're seeing a similar laws and legislations from states and Congress aiming at limiting property ownership by foreign individuals and entities. Today's webinar will examine whether these laws are properly addressing national security concerns or whether they're just mere pretext that infringes on civil rights and liberties under the guise of national security protection. For this webinar, we are partnered with APA Justice, a group focused on building a sustainable ecosystem that addresses racial profiling concerns and to facilitate, inform, and advocate on issues relating to justice and fairness for the AAPI community, including alien land laws. We will put a link on their research on the latest alien land law bills development in the chat. This webinar marks a new milestone for APH Justice as it has become a member-driven Powered by affiliate of Committee of 100. Over the next hour, our speakers from the worlds of legal and public policy will discuss the future of property rights and civil liberties. We are joined by three incredible subject matter experts. Edgar Chen, Special Policy Advisor at the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, also known as NAPABA. Edgar will provide a historical overview of alien land laws. Following, we have Gene Wu, Texas State Representative. He will talk about the current state of these laws and the impacts they will have on the Asian American community. And Ashley Gorski, Senior Staff Attorney at American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Ashley will explore key legal cases, including a recent bill introduced in Florida. Following their presentation, we are honored to have Congressman Lieu, United States Representative for California's 36th Congressional District, to share his insights and thoughts on the impact of this new wave of land ownership exclusion laws. During the second half of the program, I will moderate a panel discussion with our experts. I want to thank all of you who have submitted questions in advance of the program. We also encourage you to submit questions that you may have at any time throughout the webinar in the Q&A box. We will do our best to get through all of them during the panel discussion. Dr. Jeremy Wu, co-founder and organizer of APA Justice and a Committee of 100 member, will conclude today's webinar. Jeremy's dedication to raising awareness about the revival of land ownership exclusion laws has been instrumental in making today's webinar possible. He will highlight key takeaways and discuss how we can continue to raise awareness about the disturbing return of alien land laws. Once the webinar concludes, there will be an option to complete our post-event survey. It will pop up on your browser. Please take 2 minutes to complete the survey as your feedback is very important to us. As a reminder, today's event is being recorded. The video will be available on our website and our YouTube channel in the coming days. Thank you all for your time. and enjoy the presentation and discussion. To kick off our presentation, we'll turn to Edgar Chen, who will share the historical context of alien land laws.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you to the Committee of 100 and APA Justice for hosting this important event. It's wonderful to be here on behalf of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, or NAPABA, which represents the interests of over 80,000 Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander legal professionals, attorneys, judges, law students, and law professors. Cindy had mentioned the Committee of 100 bill tracker. This is such an important resource to track all of the legislation that is springing up all around the country. According to our colleagues at the National Agricultural Law Center, which also tracks agriculture-related restrictions on foreign ownership, alien land laws or foreign ownership restrictions have been part and parcel of American history since the founding of the Republic, when colonists wanted to enact restrictions on British loyalists. So this is not a new subject in the history of the United States. But as Cindy mentioned, the rise of anti-Asian alien land laws really stems from the early part of the 20th century as a backlash to economic competition from immigrant Japanese farmers, mainly on the West Coast. It also came on the heels of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So at the turn of the 20th century, California enacted its first alien land law in 1913. And then in 1920, it added further limitations on leaseholding. Similar laws were passed, this is in the early 20th century, in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Kansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Minnesota, Wyoming, and Florida. I'm not sure if anyone did a tracker like C100 did back then, but you can see the breadth and geographical scope of these restrictions. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the legal history and some of the sort of social and political history behind some of these land laws too. California enacted its first land law, and it was in 1913. It was on its face race neutral. I'll just read briefly what it says. The 1913 California alien land law: all aliens eligible to citizenship under the laws of the United States may acquire, possess, enjoy, cultivate, occupy, transfer, and inherit real property in the state. So the question is, who was eligible for citizenship and who was not? And the answer is very clear. This applied to Asian immigrants. Asian immigrants were not eligible to citizenship. So you have to remember that our nation's earliest restrictive immigration laws were targeted at Asians. The Page Act of 1875, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. These targeted Chinese persons. This idea of aliens eligible or ineligible for citizenship was, as late property law professor Keith Aoki had written, quote, a disingenuous euphemism to disguise the fact that the targets of such laws were first-generation Japanese immigrants. So indeed, in 1922, the Supreme Court had this decision about who could naturalize, what kinds of immigrants could actually naturalize to United States citizenship. That was a case called Ozawa v. United States. A Japanese citizen tried to gain U.S. citizenship, and the Supreme Court said that citizenship through naturalization was limited to free white persons and aliens of African nativity. Who does that leave out? People from Asian countries, Asian immigrants. And in fact, I believe the Naturalization Act of 1790, going back to the roots of the founding of the Republic, stated that only free whites could naturalize. And of course, the 14th Amendment after the Civil War gave citizenship to freed blacks, Black Americans. So again, who has been historically left out of the conversation for citizenship have been the Asian community. So following that decision by the Supreme Court on citizenship, the very next year, in 1923, the Supreme Court took up the case called Terrace v. Thompson. And that case was about a Washington state alien land law that was challenged by a Japanese citizen who tried to lease some farmland. In that decision, the Supreme Court looked back at its decision in the citizenship case, and they said, hey, you know what? The alien land law says uh, the right to own property, it's tied to whether or not you're able to become a citizen. And that's a very reasonable, that's the actual word they said. It was reasonable that that restriction was in place, and it doesn't apply or to, you know, the issue of race or national origin. They said this is about eligibility to naturalize. And I think the uncomfortable sort of reasoning behind that was that certain aliens, those who naturalized, had different duties and responsibilities to the United States. So if you were able to be a citizen, you could potentially serve in the military. You had to renounce your loyalty to your home country, and thus you could have more privileges. I think that's the reasoning behind tying property ownership with citizenship. But in the end, this came down to race. I'll return to Keith Aoki's scholarship on the rationale, what he thought was the real rationale behind these laws. In addition to suppressing economic competition from cheaper Japanese-driven labor, the perceived threat of Japan's growing industrial strength, its imperial military aspiration, and the projection onto Japanese immigrants of an image of disloyalty as a fifth column waiting to be activated at the emperor's command. This is the direct pathway later to Japanese incarceration. Okay, let me fast forward very quickly on a couple of other Supreme Court cases relevant here. In 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court, in this case called Oyama v. California, held that California's alien land law violated the 14th Amendment rights of a U.S. citizen of Japanese descent. And in 1952, California's alien land law was finally struck down by the state Supreme Court in a case called Sei Fuji v. State of California. That the California Supreme Court held that the California alien land law did violate the 14th Amendment of Japanese Americans. So at that time, we thought that's it. That's the last time we really had to deal with alien land laws in the legal system. Fast forward to 2018, voters in Florida actually finally removed the last bit of language. In Florida, in the Florida Constitution, there was still some alien land law language in the Florida Constitution. It was removed by I think it was like a ballot proposition there, and we thought that was the last nail in the coffin of alien land laws, and it was relegated to the dustbin of history, only to find that starting in 2022, 2023, a raft of new restrictions on foreign ownership, largely targeting the Chinese community, was introduced. Even though some of these laws, they look racially neutral on their face, the legislators who have introduced them clearly have said this is in response to curbing purported malign Chinese influence. That has been the #1 leading reason and rationale for the reintroduction of these laws. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We've seen this before. We've seen this movie before. We've seen this history. We've lived this history. We thought this was over and done, but here we are. And so I hope that sets the scene, and gives you some historical and legal perspective. And so excited to hear from my fellow co-panelists for thank you.
Thank you, Edgar, for the insightful overview. Now let's hear from Texas State Representative Jean Wu, who will shed some light on the current state of these laws and their impacts on our community.
Thank you so much. My name is Jean Wu. I'm a state rep out of Houston, and I just got reelected to my 7th term. But more importantly, in the last few years, I've been leading our state and leading communities around the country to fight against the current spate of alien land laws. And we know that half the states in the nation right now have passed some version of an alien land law. Now, some of those states pass kind of innocuous bills. Like Virginia had one where it basically was unenforceable and would be taken care of by mostly other systems, and essentially the bill did nothing. The concern is that many other states did pass one, and like Florida passed a very clear law that said that if you are domiciled in another country, essentially like if you're a visa holder, green card holder, you can't buy land. In some states, it varies what kind of land cannot be purchased, and a lot of it is farmland, some of it is commercial or industrial, whatever it is. The expectation is that it will get worse, because our community's hope, was that a different person would be in the White House, and Democrats would have the control of both House and the Senate in the Congress, and that we would be looking at hopefully an effort at the federal level to pass a bill that would override and repeal the state laws. Instead, what we are looking now at is the people who have been pushing this now are empowered and emboldened and have the ability to carry it forward. Instead of dealing with just the states, we now are looking at passing these laws at a federal level. So just to talk a little bit about sort of the implications of this happening, and I want to remind people that it's not just alien land laws, right? Alien land laws is where they started. Alien land laws was where it started 100 years ago. But throughout this process, if you look at the history, both the history of what has happened to our people in the past, and currently, if you look at Project 2025, which is the blueprint for all these things. In fact, a lot of people say that, well, Project 2025 is just a wish list, and it's not, they're not really going to do it. The problem for our community is that the things that Project 2025 have called for have already happened. It's not a wish list when the things that are on it are true or have come true. It's now just a list. A lot of people ask what's driving this, what's the impetus behind it. And the thing that it pains me to say is that a lot of this is not just anti-Asian hate, but it's anti-immigrant hate, and more to the point, it's anti-minority hate. And what is pushing and propelling a lot of this is not truly a national security concern, but the idea that there are too many immigrants in this country, and America was a country that was really given by God to white people, and that anybody who dispossesses white people is now an enemy. And we don't want to think about our country like this. We want to think about America in a very movie sense, that America is perfect and there's no dirty spots and everything works and everyone's equal and everyone has equal justice and access. And a lot of our community sees America in this light. But the sad reality is, like Edgar has explained, the history of our community in this country is jam-packed with discrimination and hate. As we have this idea that America is a great place for Asians and everything's perfect, I have to remind people, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, while it was passed in 1882, it was not fully repealed until 1965. Right? So 1965 is not that long ago. There were people who kept this law in place, kept the functions of this law in place for almost 100 years. And the point I have to make to people, in the community is, think about how much you have to hate a group, to hate people, to take it upon yourself to keep a law that was written in 1882, to keep it on the books despite efforts to repeal it, and to carry it out, and to make sure that not only is it on the book, but it actually has effect. Effectively banning all Asians from across the globe from entering into this country. So if you go out into the Asian community right now, Ask around. Ask, when did you come? I promise you, virtually every single person was after about 1975. And this is just a touchstone, right? The alien land law, along with all these other things, are pieces of a larger puzzle. So the alien land law prohibits ownership of land, whether that land is farmland, real estate, commercial real estate, personal residence, or any number of combinations of those things. We have new legislation being proposed that's very similar to the alien land law, just like, the Chinese Exclusion Act, just like Edgar had talked about, but laws that said that Chinese people cannot study in the United States. We had that bill filed in Texas last session, and I assume it'll be filed again, basically saying that Chinese immigrants, if you come here to study, we won't let you, even if you've been approved. And so then we move on to employment restrictions. We've known that there are serious employment restrictions in the past, such as we always ask the question, why are there so many Chinese restaurants? There are more Chinese restaurants than McDonald's in America by really wide margins. And the answer is because for 100 years, states had laws that said Chinese people can only wash people's clothes or make their food. It's two of the hardest, most dirty jobs there is, right? So that's home property ownership, employment, education, and the list goes on. If you look at Project 2025 and see what they talk about in terms of not just immigrants, but the Chinese community specifically, all these things and more are listed. The concern always is that these things will be carried out not only in Congress, but in all 50 states. And before somebody says, well, Democrats or Republicans or whatever, somebody will come fix it, I remind everyone that in the past, 100 years ago, the first state to pass an alien land law was California. And right now, which state passed their first alien land law? It was California, right? Simply being a blue state doesn't change a whole lot because hate is hate. And if our community does not go and educate the American public, people who we believe still want to do the right thing, want to not repeat the past mistakes, not want to do all the things that we write about in our textbooks that we are ashamed of. If we don't want to repeat this same movie, we have to do something different. And that different thing is this time, we will unite with the rest of our nation. This time we will unite with the rest of the communities who received the same type of hates. Latinos, African Americans, Jewish, Muslim, everybody who feels the boot of oppression on their necks. Let us join together. Let us rise up and say it is wrong to discriminate against Latinos. It is wrong to discriminate against Muslims, and it is wrong to discriminate against Asians. And I hope that our community can stand up with pride and do this and show the entire country what we're made of. I hope that you will join us in this battle. I hope you will listen to all the speakers here to talk about the things that are important to our community and realize that your rights, the benefits and the privileges that you have now, the wealth and prosperity that you're able to build in this country was built off of the backs and the blood and the lives of African Americans and others who fought for those rights during the Civil Rights era. But as I always tell people, our liberties and our rights are not written into stone. Every generation must fight for them, and this has proven itself true to this day. Every community, whether we rest on the work of others or not, we must go back out and rewater the tree of liberty. And this is our cause now. This is our duty. This is our mission. And I hope that you will join with all of us as we proceed into 2025, and we will show the entire world what our community is. And we will remind people that Chinese Americans, Asian Americans are Americans, and we're not going anywhere.
Thank you, Jean, for these inspirational remarks. Next, we have Ashley Dorsky, who will give us a deeper dive into the legal landscapes and how we are using the legal system to challenge these alien land laws.
Thanks so much, Cindy. My name is Ashley Gorski. I'm a senior staff attorney with the ACLU's National Security Project, and I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk about our pending challenge to Florida's discriminatory land law. This is a lawsuit that we brought last year on behalf of Chinese immigrants who live, work, and study in Florida, as well as a real estate firm that is losing business due to Florida's new law. We at the ACLU are joined by lawyers from the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the DeHang Law Offices, and the law firm Quinn Emanuel. Florida's law, known as SB 264, passed last year, and it is one of the worst of the new alien land laws in the nation. It is sweeping in its scope. It bars people from purchasing property in Florida if their domicile or permanent home is in China, and if they aren't US citizens or permanent residents. There is only one exception, but it is incredibly narrow. People with non-tourist visas or who have been granted asylum may purchase one residential property, but that property has to be under 2 acres and not within 5 miles of a military installation in the state. But Florida is a big state with a lot of military installations, more than 20, and many of those are within 5 miles of city centers in major metropolitan areas like Orlando, Miami, and Tallahassee. Now, this law has another bizarre feature in that there are also restrictions on purchases by people domiciled in other quote-unquote countries of concern, like Cuba and Venezuela. But those restrictions are less severe than the restrictions on people who are domiciled in China. And people who are domiciled in China and who purchase land in violation of the law are subject to more severe criminal penalties as well. These can include felony charges and up to 5 years in prison. So we brought suit on behalf of these plaintiffs in May 2023 before the law was scheduled to go into effect. And we asked the court to enter what's called a preliminary injunction. That would block the statute while the litigation is pending. And it's important because lawsuits like this can take years, so it's a really important remedy. And we are arguing in the case that Florida's statute is unlawful for 3 key reasons. First, it violates the right to equal protection because states can't discriminate on the basis of national origin or alienage unless they satisfy a very strict legal test. And Florida concedes that it cannot meet that high legal standard in this situation. Second, Florida's law also violates a federal statute, the Fair Housing Act. And that is a foundational civil rights statute that prohibits national origin and race discrimination in housing. And very importantly, this statute also forbids laws that have a disparate impact. So even if those laws aren't motivated by discriminatory intent, if they're housing laws that have a disparate impact, they're forbidden under the Fair Housing Act. Third, Florida's law is preempted by federal law. And what that means in our system is that if there's a federal regime that conflicts with the state regime, the federal regime trumps. And here, there's already a federal regime governing national security review of real estate transactions. There is an interagency committee called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and it conducts case-by-case review of property transactions that potentially pose national security threats. That committee can approve transactions, it can impose mitigation measures, but only the president at the federal level can actually prohibit a property transaction because of the foreign affairs implications. But what Florida's done is completely conflicted with that federal regime, and it interferes with the president's discretion to weigh the foreign affairs implications of limiting and prohibiting property transactions. And then just taking a step back, it's terrible policy, and it creates a chaotic mess to have 50 states setting their own foreign policy. Just because a country might be considered an adversary country for the purposes of a Commerce Department regulation involving communications technology does not mean that it is appropriate for individual states to be calling that country in a statute an adversary country and prohibiting people who are domiciled there from buying property in the state. What the state is doing in Florida and what states are doing across the country is really problematic for the federal government's foreign affairs power. So the district court in our case is the first level court in Florida, and it denied our motion for a preliminary injunction. We immediately appealed that decision to a court called the 11th Circuit. That's the appeals court here in federal court. And in addition to our main appeal, we also asked the 11th Circuit to block Florida's law while the appeal was pending. And in February of this year, we had a really significant victory with respect to that emergency relief. 3 judges on the court granted that relief for 2 of our clients who had housing transactions that were pending. They had signed contracts for homes before the law went into effect, and they were concerned that if they closed on those transactions, they could be subject to prosecution. And the court said that the law should be blocked as to those clients and that they were likely to prevail on their arguments that Florida's law is preempted by federal law. In April of this year, we had oral argument on the main appeal before a different panel of 11th Circuit judges, and we're still waiting on a decision. Based on the questions that were asked to argument, it's difficult to read the tea leaves, but we are expecting a ruling any day now, and we are hopeful. We think even if there is a loss at this stage of the litigation, that the suit should be able to continue. This is litigation around this preliminary form of relief. And we're also looking very closely at bills that have been passed in other states. And the C100 bill tracker has really been invaluable. So thank you to Cindy and to the entire C100 team. We are especially concerned about state laws that restrict the ability of US residents, people who are immigrants here in the US, to buy homes. Home purchases are so foundational to building a life here, getting an economic foothold, and they have real impacts on everyday people's lives. So one example here is a new law in Indiana that severely restricts the ability of Chinese citizens to buy homes near military installations. And we are very interested in hearing from anyone who is directly impacted by this new Indiana law. So with that, I'll close there because I know everyone is eager to hear Representative Lieu, myself included. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ashley, for this comprehensive overview of the Florida case. Also, thank you and ACLU for taking on such a difficult bill. Now it is my true honor to introduce Congressman Ted Lieu, the United States Representative for California's 36th Congressional District. Congressman Lieu has been an outspoken advocate on the Hill for the AANHPI community. We appreciate his leadership. Congressman Lieu, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and thank you for everyone participating today, for fighting the good fight every day. And I heard your presentation, Ashley. I agree with everything Ashley said from a legal perspective. What I want to talk about now is the political perspective. I am an American member of Congress, and I represent Americans. Sometimes, however, there are laws that are so xenophobic, right? It ends up affecting Americans who happen to be of Asian descent. So I do not represent Chinese citizens. And if we sort of politically say we're advocating for Chinese foreign nationals, we will lose that argument politically. But because of the way these laws are constructed, it turns out that if you have a funny sounding last name like mine, then you can be subject to a higher kind of scrutiny by an entire real estate chain, buyers, sellers, real estate agents, banks, and so on. And that can affect Asian Americans. And to me, that's just flat out unconstitutional, because then all of a sudden, anyone with an Asian last name is going to have to present additional documentation or be asked questions that a German American would not be asked if they were to buy a house. So I think politically, that would be the argument we would make, that, hey, look, you're hurting Americans who happen to be of Asian descent. And because of the entire xenophobia attached to this law, you're just going to sort of continue to ramp up a discrimination against people who happen to have last names like mine. My view also is that Abraham Lincoln had it right when he said public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And so understand your power to shape public sentiment, and having organizations and other folks around the country make arguments as to why these laws are bad ideas, why it's affecting Asian Americans, I think can be quite powerful. I do want to commend Jean Lieu for leading an effort to stop some of the worse things from happening in Texas. But this is something that's just going to have to play out in all the different states, and we're just going to need organizations and folks to step up and fight back. I am a co-author of the legislation in Congress authored by Al Green and Judy Chu that would effectively ban these alien land laws. I call these basically the Chinese Exclusion Act version 2.0. It is not going to pass in a Republican-controlled Congress next term, although I do think we'll flip the House next term, and then we'll see what will happen. But I think it's important to continue to raise the issue and to highlight this legislation and to make people aware that not only is this sort of bad policy, it's going to be discriminatory against Asian Americans. And look forward to working with all of you as we fight back both politically and legally against these really bad bills and laws.
Thank you, Congressman Lieu, for your words and for taking the time to join us today. Now let's go ahead and bring back Edgar, Jean, and Ashley for our panel discussion. And I want to thank everybody. We have a very lively group here. Lots of questions coming through our Q&A, and so we will get through as many as we can. I know that during the presentation, we did answer some of them already in the box, but these are great questions. So I want to start off with something that we've seen a little bit of this in the Q&A box. As Americans, we may view actions of foreign government entities, individuals with some suspicion and have legitimate concern for our country's security. Since these legislations target foreign government entities and individuals, some in the Asian American community may feel that they are shielded from facing negative impact from these laws and are comfortable supporting the passage of such bills. So I want to start with just, in your opinion, do you believe that that assumption is true? In other words, if you are a US citizen of Asian descent, will you not be affected by these bills? Why don't we start with Jean?
Thank you. So I think that is often the thought from the immigrant community, especially among actually the people who will be affected by this the most. Recent immigrant Chinese, basically, like, they don't believe that this is possible. They don't believe that this could happen in America. And they don't see themselves as a spy or anything else. So they say, well, why would we be targeted? But in reality, they are actually the very people that these laws are intended to target. And what is more is, just as many of the leaders in the movement against these laws are actually Taiwanese Americans and Japanese Americans who would not be affected by the laws the way they're written right now. But those leaders in our community understand that there are external ramifications, there are secondary effects that go throughout, just like during COVID, when politicians started making light of the situation, when they started mocking the community, when they started denigrating our people got hurt, people got shot and stabbed and killed, because those types of policies, those types of reactions from leaders at a large enough scale will have trickle-down effects. And that is also what we have to be concerned about, not just what the immediate effects are, but what are the secondary effects and what's the long-term effects on our community?
Thank you. That actually ties in directly into one of the questions that we had received during registration, which is, now that we are seeing the sweeping legislation on land purchase restriction, what else may the government do to Asians in the United States? And what other rights do we feel may be next? Ashley, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just one quick point I'd like to make. I think Jean really hit the nail on the head in terms of why there should be broader concern about these laws. And to make this really concrete, with Florida's law in particular, it imposes criminal liability on people who sell in violation of the law. And so that incentivizes sellers to really take a close look at who they're selling to. And imagine being in a competitive bidding process with a seller who's really scared about maybe selling to someone who's actually domiciled in China. The seller isn't sure exactly what that means. The seller doesn't know, exactly what the potential buyer's heritage is. I mean, it's so obvious how this law will have disparate impacts, not only on, Chinese immigrants, but on Asian Americans in a much broader sense. And then, in terms of what could come next, I hesitate to speculate, but one thing we've seen in Florida too, like I think Gene mentioned during his remarks, are restrictions on the ability of state universities to employ Chinese immigrants as, for example, research assistants. So you have people who've already been approved by the federal government to come to Florida to study in Florida. If you're studying as a graduate student, part of that involves working and being employed by the university as a graduate student. And Florida's law makes it extremely difficult and burdensome now for the universities to actually employ these students. And I definitely have concerns about legislation like that appearing at the federal level. There are new executive orders out of Texas, which I'm sure Jean can speak to as well, that limit the ability of people who are employed by Texas universities to travel to China for professional purposes. Imagine if you're a professor of Chinese literature and want to do archival work as part of your job. Under this Texas EO, you can't do that anymore. I mean, restricting the ability of people to travel to China, all of that is extremely disturbing to me, and it all presents very serious constitutional concerns.
And if I can add, again, if you really want to know what is next, look at the blueprint, look at the guide. Just go look up Project 2025, and when our office has put together like the quick and dirty rundown of all the things that would affect the Asian community and what they want to do. It's land ownership, it's immigration, it's employment, it's education, and it's birthright citizenship, and it's mass deportation.
I want to add one thing there on the education front, right? We should call it what it is. These are school segregation cases, right? If you have educational opportunities that are restricted, even if the school admits foreign students or Chinese students, but restricts them from participating in extracurricular activities, that is an indicia of school segregation. That comes from our desegregation civil rights cases from the 1960s. And one other thought about where this is leading. In Arkansas, I want to mention that there is litigation right now challenging two laws. One, restrictions on foreign ownership of agricultural land, and the second law restricting foreign ownership of digital mining businesses. There's a preliminary injunction in place in Arkansas on those laws. The plaintiff is a U.S. citizen of Chinese descent. So if the question was, as Representative Lieu said, if I have a last name that sounds Chinese, am I going to be targeted? Well, we have a U.S. citizen who is being investigated. These laws do not cover U.S. citizens. They exempt U.S. citizens, yet we have U.S. citizens under investigation. So all of the worst case scenarios, and these are not sort of doomsday scenarios. They are actually happening in some cases.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, when I read the complaint, in the complaint, the plaintiff specifically said that he had reached out to the law enforcement agency to show that he was a U.S. citizen, and they essentially, that wasn't enough, right? And so he felt that he had to file a federal lawsuit in order to protect himself and his company.
Right. And the question was, Arkansas said they had some reason to believe that there might be ties to China. I'm not sure what those ties to China are, other than the plaintiff's last name, unless the state will produce something in discovery that shows maybe some other intelligence. But at this point, We don't have anything else to speculate on other than he's a U.S. citizen of Chinese descent.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to get too deep in this point, but I think no, that's Edgar's exactly right. If you want to see the beginnings of like the slippery slope that we're going to fall into, look at the New York Times piece on Grace Meng, right? The accusation is there was somebody accused of spying, and they had this tangential relationship to an organization, and then Grace Meng has a tangential relationship to this organization. So by those transitive properties, Grace Meng might be a spy, right? And I get accused of being a CCP spy on a daily basis, and so does Ted Lieu. Ted Lieu, who is a decorated U.S. veteran, who has given everything he has to this country, is still called a spy and a traitor on a daily basis. And those kind of things will spread. And once people start making those accusations louder and louder, people will call for investigations. And this will be a new McCarthyism, where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you've actually done. It matters that you have Asian face.
So one of the things, and it's one of the questions in the Q&A that I think is very timely now, if someone is affected by these alien land laws, what agencies, organizations can they go to? Edgar, you're here with NAPABA, Ashley with ACLU, Jean, go ahead, your hands say,
Oh, no,
are you
I was
saying
pointing
contact me
at the-
personally?
Oh, I'm Ashley's above me. I don't know where she is.
Oh, okay. So I think, you know, Ashley, you mentioned earlier you are interested in talking to those, especially maybe affected by the Indiana bill, but overall, generally, is ACLU kind of open to hearing from the community on these laws?
Absolutely. We are definitely interested in hearing from people who are affected by these laws, no matter what state they're in. Even if it's not a situation where that person would want to litigate, I think just knowing their story and seeing if maybe we can bring some more of these stories together and help to change the public conversation around this, bring more attention to this, I would definitely encourage anyone who's affected to reach out. My email address is just agorski@aclu.org.
And this is also a reminder for the Asian community to go support the ACLU with donations. You won't say it, but I will.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Jean, to your point, all of the nonprofits, all of us that are doing this work, we are only able to do this work because of the support from the community. So if you happen to be getting a nice bonus or something like that, please do support the organizations. You know, I want to play a little bit of a devil's advocate. So one of our attendees here pointed out that several countries, including China, have restrictions on foreign ownership that are stricter than the ones here in the United States. So the question is, you know, do you believe that all US land ownership restriction laws currently, this new wave, are inherently discriminatory and violates the US Constitution? You know, are there any versions of such laws where you feel it's sufficiently narrowly tailored to address the national security concerns? And then also, should these laws have some kind of reciprocity clause that would permit US citizens from purchasing land in the foreign country, and that's the only way we allow those to come in? I know that I threw out 4 questions in one, so anyone who wants to take any.
I'll take the first chunk. So in terms of the reciprocity, I get this question all the time, and as an argument, like, well, China doesn't allow you blah, 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 blah. China has a residency requirement. So if you are a resident of China, you can buy property. So I don't think it's a lot different than what we have here. The issue isn't China. The issue is Chinese Americans. Because I don't care what China does, I care what the United States does. And the issue isn't that how are we doing in China? The issue is no other community in the United States is facing restrictions, right? The discrimination saying we're going to treat you differently than any other community in the world. That's the problem. If you want to make a rule that says blanketly, as a national policy, no immigrants in this country may purchase land, it's insane, but I'm fine with that, right? because it doesn't single us out for different treatment, and that's the real key, right? It doesn't say we're different. And I'm sorry to go on this a little bit longer. The fear is that if we say that the Asian people are different, if we say Chinese people are special and they need to be handled specially, if we do that enough times, then we will eventually get to the point where we say, well, if we need to round these people up, it's okay, because they're different. They are a special case and they don't get the same rights as everyone else. That's what happened in World War II. That's what happened to the Japanese Americans. And we're laying the same pathway down again.
Let me add one thing to what Representative Wu said that distinguishes Chinese laws from American laws. China does not have a constitution that protects property rights like our Fifth Amendment. China does not have First Amendment rights that protect political expression and freedom of speech. Someone said to me a fantastic quote about alien land laws. They said, I thought it was the Chinese Communist Party that was in the business of restricting property rights for Chinese people. Probably the best line I've heard to sum it up here, okay? And that is why we have case law and protections in this country that prohibit discrimination in fair housing, as Ashley mentioned, based on race, religion, national origin, alienage, all of these protections. That is why this reciprocity argument, I think, while, a rational, thing to raise, maybe, is really belied by just looking at our two systems. One is, an open country and a democracy, and one is not. And I would expect better from our democracy.
Thank you. So this was a very interesting question, and I had similar thoughts on it. We've seen a rapid resurgence of these alien land laws at a state level, right? And so someone asked is there an organization or a group that's behind this movement? Any insights on the origin of this new wave of alien land law? And do we think that this is going to move away from state legislation, but now with also at the federal level? Should we be concerned?
Yeah, I'll take that first. On the federal level, we have seen some attempts at a national restriction through either the I think the Farm Bill on agricultural parcels, restricting purchases of, I think it was like over 350 acres from folks from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. So there is legislation out there at the federal level on this.
All right, I want to be mindful of time. We haven't covered nearly a third of the questions that have come in, so I do apologize to those who have come in. We will try to figure something out to answer them, whether it's through like a blog or something. But real quick, everyone here who's participating obviously have concerns or are interested in this issue. So I would like to go just across the room. Can you provide a practical, tangible action that private citizens can take to combat this? And let's do like a 30-second, we'll start with Ashley and end with Jean.
Call your representatives, call your senators, state and federal level. Those calls matter. It makes a difference, organizing your communities, political action. We're doing all we can in the courthouse, but political action here, political opinion, public opinion, that is what's going to drive real change. And that would be my quick recommendation.
So I've been telling people that have listening to me, we need to do three things. One is to educate our own community, and for our community to educate the general public. Two, in order for that people to understand and change the narrative to the idea that this is not really about national security, this is about race, this is about national origin, this is about immigration and white supremacy. Second, we need to organize our communities and organize our allies. That means that we need to be prepared to stand up and go to our congressional members, go to our state representatives, go to anybody who makes a decision on our behalf and tell them that not only are we here and that we oppose these things, but we're backed by the entire community. And the last thing is that we need to take visible action at a national level. I'm calling for us to both march on our own state capitals and march on Washington, D.C., that we need to have a Asian American civil rights fight this next year.
Yeah, I again, political empowerment, absolutely agree. I want to congratulate Representative Lieu on being elected to lead the Texas Democratic Caucus. That is an incredible sign of progress. To have you be the face of political empowerment in Texas. I want to say that the civil rights arguments, we've talked a lot about racism and discrimination. But if folks feel uncomfortable or targeted here, they need to speak to their realtor and tell them that this is a problem for industry, that this is hampering business. There is an economic and business case against the stupidity of some of these bills that are really damaging the economy. And the economic argument is something that it's not red state, it's not blue state, it's green, it's money. And money can talk, and there are some certainly powerful economic arguments to be made here.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley, Edgar, Jean, for your remarks today. I do apologize to those in the audience who submitted questions that we didn't get to. Like I said, we will figure out a way to get those answers to you. But now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jeremy Wu to provide closing remarks.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm Jeremy Wu, and thank you for joining today's webinar on alien land laws. As Congressman Ted Lieu and our distinguished panelists, Edgar Chen, Jean Wu, and Ashley Gorski have so eloquently explained, the reemergence of historically discriminatory bills and laws in state legislatures and Congress highlights our nation's ongoing struggle for equity and inclusion. From the earliest days of Asian immigration to America, such laws have been used to marginalize and exclude communities, often under the guise of protecting economic or national security interests. While some of these concerns may be valid, they should never serve as a pretext for profiling or discrimination. We've seen this before, as many panelists pointed out. While these laws may be framed with new terminology, their intent and impact remain disturbingly familiar. Yet, as history has shown, we can and must overcome these challenges together. Today's discussion has shed light on the historical and legal context of alien land laws, their harmful legacy, and their modern manifestation, such as Florida's SB 264. This underscores the critical need for vigilance, unity, and action in confronting these injustices by advocacy, education, coalition building, litigation, and more. As we close today's webinar, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Congressman Lieu and our exceptional panelists for their insights, and to all of you for your participation. I'd like to also extend heartfelt thanks to Cindy, Sai, and the dedicated community of 100 staff, as well as my colleagues at APA Justice, Professor Stephen Pei, Vincent Wang, and Madeline Gable, for their tremendous efforts for organizing this event. We encourage you to complete our post-webinar survey. Your feedback is invaluable. This session has been recorded and will be available on the Committee of 100 website and YouTube page. Let us take the lessons from today and move forward with renewed resolve to build a more just and inclusive society. Together, we can ensure that this kind of history does not repeat again. Wishing you all a happy holiday and a prosperous new year. We look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you, and now I will turn the floor back to Cindy.
Thank you, Jeremy. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists, Edgar, Jean, Ashley, as well as Congressman Lieu for their insights. As you can see, this is an issue that requires all of our attention and all of our commitment. I understand that some people may feel, and we see it in the chat box here, that speaking out individually can be a bit frightening. I encourage all of you to join and support organizations such as Committee of 100, groups like APA Justice, ACLU, NAPABA, where we are, working together and with each other to fight this long fight. And so please, whether it's through volunteer, through financial support, get involved with your AAPI community and organizations. On the screen is the QR code if you would like to provide some support to Committee of 100 and APA Justice. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you in another event soon. Take care.